This is how we play.
What makes a man? Iron enough to make a nail, lime enough to paint a wall, water enough to drown a dog, sulfur enough to stop the fleas, potash enough to wash a shirt, gold enough to buy a bean, silver enough to coat a pen, lead enough to ballast a bird, phosphor enough to light the town, poison enough to kill a cow. That's from Terry Pratchett's Wintersmith. I just did an episode of Phenomenology and Sociology, reciting the Leckman volume, in which we discussed the forced separation from the physically obtainable, mathematically quantifiable world from the Lebenswelt, the life world, the socially constructed reality in which we all live and which we all share. When you make a character in Dungeons & Dragons, has the character that you have made fallen within these quantitative procedures, or are they a person? Is there more to it than that? You can follow every rule within the book when you create a character, and you will have something which is mathematically viable and operates within a system of rules. None of what I just said sounds like Dungeons & Dragons to me, though. None of that. So we're talking about what I have called the art persona, which is the art of making a person. This is something that happens in the course of a particular kind of Dungeons & Dragons. It's not the only kind of Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, where I describe the art persona in my own rulebook, I very clearly go over where there might be other ways of doing it, other variations on the theme, which might be more appropriate to a certain style of play. When you have a session zero for what is planned to be an ongoing long-term campaign between a group of people that you already know get along well together, now what you're dealing with here is a potential for the art persona, the creation of a person, which is not something that can be done by following a set of rules. It's something that requires a Gestalt psychology process where people are sharing a verisimilitude of the secondary world, where all of the people at the table are looking into the game world in a way that makes a person from within that world bloom. This occurs by inverting what we normally think of as the process of character creation. When you create a character by saying, okay, I am planning to fill the role of a healer, or I am planning to make a bard. Well, if I'm going to be a bard, then I'm going to be a charisma-type character, and I probably have to have sex with lots of stuff, whether I like it or not, because I'm participating within the trope of the bard. So that bard should probably be some variation of the more, let's call them fuckable humanoids, right? So you're thinking half-elf, tiefling, human, Aasimar, but probably not dragonborn or Yuan-ti, or gnome, dwarf. This process doesn't create a person. It creates something which quickly and easily gives itself to the rules of the game as we understand them. But a person within a world is a product of that world and knows that world and is a piece of that world. And that has to come first, which is why it's important in a story. If you have a session zero, a group of people can sit around and talk to one another about what they expect from the game, what they want to have happen in the game. The Dungeon Master can tell them about the world. And then between the Dungeon Master having this discussion with them and them discussing their characters with one another, a much more fully formed picture of who a person is going to be can come into fruition. What kind of character do you want to play? How do you see this character working within the world? This is the way that the world works. Going back and forth through these juxtapositions before rules are imposed upon the process. And then once rules are imposed upon the process, it's because the Dungeon Master, in my case, often goes, well, you know, you say that, there's actually a rule specifically to accommodate that within this particular class, and then that creates the person that you have been imagining and that the people at the table are working toward. That, what sort of character are you going to make? Well, with the roles that we've got here, I want to put the 18 in strength, so I'm going to make this really strong character. And then, because it's going to be a strong character, it probably means that I'm going to be in melee a lot, so I'm going to put the next highest result in Constitution, and then I'm going to have more hit points because of that. And this is your answer to that question. Silver enough to coat a pen. Constitution enough for the front line, right? Sulfur enough to stop the fleas. That is strength high enough to do melee combat and have viable damage. But there's a second half to that poem. The second verse is strength enough to build a home, time enough to hold a child, and love enough to break a heart. That is a person. The first 11 lines of the poem are not. Well, 12 lines, I suppose, because these are the things that make a man is a line of the poem. I digress. When we are making the person that our game is going to be about, we don't generally start with what kind of character you're going to make. We start with who they are. I'm thinking that I want a character who is well educated but is frustrated with the world and had to leave the world of academia behind. That's just the academic background, right? But we might presuppose because of that phrase that we would go to wizard if we were on our own. But with the art persona, a dungeon master might say, you say that there was this organization that recently disbanded according to what's happening within the world itself. And another player might say something like, oh, I was thinking of something sort of like the opposite of that, like somebody who was from a much simpler background, farm folk maybe, right? And then had to try to learn something on their own because they were equally frustrated with not being able to get access to an education. So how do these two things come together? And by the time you get to what class these characters are, you're already having a radically different conversation, right? You didn't start with how much gold it takes to make the character that you've got based on what's available. You started with whether or not they would build a home.